Houston, heavy runway 26, clear for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, runway 26, heavy good.
Welcome to the Aeropedia Podcast. I'm Ashwin.
And I'm Peter. Today we have Harrison Wolf with us, who's the Associate Director of Advanced Aviation for the Flight Safety Foundation. Prior to the Flight Safety Foundation, Harrison was Director of Global Aviation Policy at Zipline, a leading drone delivery company where he led policy development for AAM and drones at the World Economic Forum's Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Harrison teaches SMS for remotely piloted aircraft systems at the University of Southern California's Viterbi School of Engineering. So, Ashwin, do you think we'll ever have a guest whose first aviation experience was riding on a drone?
Wow, that sounds scary. But yeah, given the right wind conditions, maybe we will someday. Harrison, thanks for joining the Aeropedia Podcast. Really excited to have you on here. As we start off, could you just walk us through your background, how you got started in aviation, and your professional journey?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I always love talking drones and helping to, talk a bit about the various ways to get into aviation. I think that's certainly my background has not been a typical one. I came out of graduate school in public policy right at the height of sort of the Great Recession, right? Or 2010, 2009, somewhere in there. We had, I think, 3 of our 60 people in our graduating class had work straight out of jobs. So I went into this and was just looking everywhere for work and happened to be brought on by, the USC Aviation Safety and Security Program, which was a University of Southern California looking to do international business. And what I found there were just really passionate people who cared deeply about aviation safety. And it was contagious. And I was doing that and, doing my business work and then just learning as much as I could. And I think that was something that stuck with me my whole life, was like being around people who care about something and are smart is the best way to get into, to open up all sorts of doors for your life, right? And so, from there, I learned as much as I could, started publishing papers on research, and our focus was safety risk management for traditional aviation. Drones were starting to become more interesting, I would say. They were moving from this very difficult, more remote control aircraft to implementing flight controllers and GPS technology and new types of cameras and all of these new technologies that were proliferating and coming together to create basically the DJI Phantom, right? That was right when the Phantom started coming out. So I started publishing papers on the use of safety risk management as a way to enable drones. Basically, my thesis was that drones won't exist if a market won't exist, the use won't exist at scale if we have to go through the same type of certification that aircraft have to, because the technology changes so rapidly and the uses and operations change so dynamically that it's not possible to use the same type of flight rules and regulations to support them. And I was lucky that ended up being sort of, I would say, half right, almost right, especially over the last 10 years. And now moving forward, we're really looking towards more of a flight rule environment and codification and industry standards and things. But that got me started and left USC. I still teach there. I teach safety risk management for remotely piloted aircraft, but left there to start a business. I started a little boutique, consulting business for oil and gas and energy development, distribution, transmission, and mosquito and vector control. So basically, anybody who cared about safety, wanted to use drones, and had the funding to bring those drone programs into their space, and that was really fun for a couple of years. Then I really just found a community that embraced this rapid technology change at the World Economic Forum, which is the International Organization for Private-Public Partnerships. And that brought me to places like Rwanda, Ghana, Japan, China, India, to help co-curate and develop communities of regulators who care deeply about remaining progressive, embracing new technologies like drones and advanced air mobility, and helping to create those regulations that we even see today as the precursors to things like Part 107 or the future Part 108, or the specific operational risk assessment, which is a new approach to risk assessment out of Europe and being implemented there. So, that was amazing to be able to be a part of that, where I was introduced to a company called Zipline. Zipline is a drone delivery company doing drone delivery at scale in Rwanda, started in Rwanda and Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. It's based out of San Francisco area, Half Moon Bay. And more recently started operating in Arkansas and North Carolina and partnering with Walmart. So I was there for about 3 years as their head of global aviation policy, and just have the most great admiration for their approach to safety. And then finally, recently joined the Flight Safety Foundation about 1.5 years ago, where I lead our advanced aviation systems group in partnership with my colleagues there. And we're focused on advancing aviation safety writ large. And my, of course, viewpoint is that the drone community, the advanced air mobility community, is very data rich and is driven, really focused on impact. And I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from this data first approach to safety that new entrants have as it's bubbling up into legacy aviation. And of course, the approach to aviation safety that legacy aviation can have, coming down and lifting up drones and new entrants. So that's sort of a long-winded approach to my background, but it's certainly not your typical journey, I think, in aviation.
Wow, very cool. And so you've always had this calling, I guess, towards safety and drones and unmanned aerial vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that once I was aware of that community and that industry and, the success that aviation has had in its safety, and just, I'd say that I was always drawn to the magic of flight. Like, I still look up into the sky and see like a 777 and think, how does that thing fly? Like, I understand the physics, I get it that it's possible. But then when you see like a small village, what was once probably a number of people that was like a pretty good sized village, able to fly through the air, do things, move from one part of the world to another part of the world, just being able to be a part of that experience, I think that's what really has drawn me. And then that safety element is the only thing that makes it possible, right? Like, people wouldn't fly if you weren't absolutely certain that you were going to get to where you need to go. And so for me, that's why it all makes sense. And to be able to take some of that experience and apply it to new technologies that have the ability to revolutionize or transform society, or even, accomplish the sustainable development goals of the UN, or, fight climate change, do any of these things that we need to do as a people, like, I think that's really fantastic. And that's what really drives me every day.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's just testament to how many varied backgrounds there are that find their way into aviation, but all see the passion once you're here. So
Absolutely.
That's great. Maybe you've mentioned drones quite a bit in your discussion, but for our listeners, right, there's a scale, and maybe you could help explain what the thresholds are. So there's drones, and then there's unmanned aerial vehicles. There's the terms of advanced air mobility, and we have these electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Could you give a bit of an overview of where do drones start and stop? Where do eVTOLs start and stop? And did your work encompass all of that, or just parts of it?
Man, that is a great question. I think, I have a small anecdote I'll tell you, which is that about 5 years ago, or maybe 6 or 7 years ago, at the big drone conference that takes place every year, which is, an organization called AUVSI, and they have Exponential, and they have this big conference. That was like a place in a moment in time when people were pushing back on the concept of using the word drone, right? Because a drone was this like scary small thing or scary big thing that was delivering weapons in the Middle East at the time, right? Like this was something that everybody heard the word drone, and either you were scared, but everyone sort of knew what the word was, or could look up at like a white, uncrewed aircraft or unmanned aircraft flying around and be like, oh, that's a drone. And everyone was trying to change it to remotely piloted aircraft or unmanned aircraft vehicle or UAV or UAS, unmanned aircraft system, or uncrewed aircraft system, if you're saying it in a non-gendered way. And I remember on stage, it was the keynote person, he said, look, industries would kill to have a one word that everybody knows that typifies your industry, that you can say like drones and everybody knows what it is. All you have to do is change sort of the tenor of it or the connotation around it. And from a marketing perspective, we should just stick with drones. And from then forward, I think people were pretty okay with drones. I would say that when I think about it and talk about it, like I consider drones to be, I do think there's a spectrum, right? On the smaller side, you have things that can be tiny. You could get it something as small as like a hummingbird. You can have something like a DJI Phantom or a Skydio. These are all companies that create drones, smaller ones that are highly automated, that are able to fly completely. If you program in a route and it can just execute that route on its own, I would say that goes up until you start to get some like commercial applications, larger aircraft like a DJI Inspire, or some of these platforms like what Zipline does, which is a bit of a larger fixed wing aircraft, but can fly fully autonomously. You see up to like 30 aircraft per operator. I would say that once you start moving well beyond 55 pounds, you start moving into, I think, a little bit more away from like a drone and more towards more of a system, an unmanned aircraft system is where I start to think about that. Although people use the terms interchangeably. As you get larger and as the automation reduces, you start to see the use of remotely piloted aircraft or RPA used more pervasively or prevalently. And it also depends on what government institution, if you're talking to a government, right? So ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is sort of like the FAA for the world, they really have an RPAS panel, or everything sort of falls under the remotely piloted aircraft designation. They do have some UAS guidance, and their difference is larger and smaller, or those capable of cross-border operations and those that are not capable of cross-border operations, or which, you're not talking about that. So it really just comes down to who you're talking to and the definitions you're putting in place. And then of course you have, you have like urban air mobility or regional air mobility. I think that's sort of going away and becoming more under the advanced air mobility or AAM moniker. And that's starting to get into like passenger and heavy lift cargo. Those are more like the vertical takeoff and landing, or eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. So all of these things, they have sort of specific designation. When I'm talking about what I do, I generally talking about everything from the small to the large, because I do think it exists on a spectrum, and usually that spectrum is a risk spectrum. So the higher the risk, the more complex the operations, the more you're talking about advanced air mobility or UAM or RPAS. And the less risk, you're talking about more like, small UAS or drones, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And that spectrum really gives you a great idea of the sheer breadth, right, of applications that are currently being worked on. So, I wanted to kind of get into, as these applications are developed, across different sizes, different missions as well, right? There potentially could be a future where all of these work, and there's a lot of them flying above our heads, right? It gives me a bit of anxiety, but okay. So let's say there's a lot of these flying above our heads. What are the key safety considerations that we're starting to think about today, and what are the steps that we're taking, and what are the safety frameworks and safety cultures that we're putting in place to ensure that they're operating in an extremely safe environment, not just for the vehicles themselves, but for the folks on the ground as well?
Yeah. That's a great question. How can we build on sort of the experience of safety in traditional aviation to create an even more robust, safe environment for this new form of aviation, this new approach? And that's something that I've sort of dedicated my career to over the past 5 or 6 years. You know, I'd say in terms of life cycles in the drone space or advanced air mobility space, we often fall into this crawl, walk, run mentality where we look at, as we're starting, it's the immediate risks, it's the immediate challenges ahead of us. So Part 107, which is 14, Code of Federal Regulations, Volume 14, Part 107, was a way to codify low risk environments. So basically it's don't fly over people, don't fly larger than 55 pounds or less, don't fly beyond visual line of sight, and don't fly for delivering packages without expertise and knowledge that you would need through waiver or exemption. And you're likely relatively safe, right? Oh, and below 500 feet, right? And so if you follow those things, those rules, then you're likely in a lower risk environment operation or less complex operation. You should be able to do what you need to do commercially. But as we move beyond those very specific low risk environments or operations, it does get more complex. And so what we're seeing is need for things like a robust safety management system. We're seeing the implementation of and embracing of safety culture. We're seeing investment from the FAA and other government agencies into better safety management oversight for drones and the opportunity to develop data sets that can be shared and lessons learned. The FAA right now is going through sort of a reinvention of the drone safety team, which is looking at models similar to the commercial aviation safety team, CAST, or a SIAS for reporting, looking at how we can use ASRS database to do industry-wide collaborations and lesson sharing. And we're seeing the development of new regulations that enable a medium risk tier that can use more advanced risk assessment processes. So I was the chair of the ASTM, which is a standards group. I was the chair of the operational risk assessment standard something like 8 years ago when we published our first standard on operational risk assessment that was later used for waivers and exemptions to get people to be able to fly things like beyond visual line of sight or over people. And now that risk assessment standard is evolving to enable more complex, beyond visual line of operation, site of operations, multiple vehicles per operator. And so these things that maybe worked really well 5 years ago need to be updated and continuously evolving in the same way that safety management system need to keep changing and evolving and new forms of data collected. At the Flight Safety Foundation, we're working with NASA on things like the in-time aviation safety management system development, which is looking at how we can create an in-time data sharing predictive analytics approach to SMS. So you're not forensically looking at what has happened to predict the future, but what could happen in the very near term to influence operations. And that's something I think is just absolutely vital to not just drones and advanced air mobility, but the future of airspace when we are bringing in things like you said, which is high volumes of aircraft at low altitude, integrated airspace, between drones, remotely piloted aircraft, whatever name you want to call them, in close proximity to passenger carrying eVTOLs or hypersonics or supersonics, right? Or, maybe we're talking about lighter than air vehicles that are acting as sky buses between cities. We don't know that all of these proposals are really out there, but it's going to take sort of the data-driven connective tissue that is safety management to make it all happen.
It's really interesting, and it's great to see that there's the evolution too, right? That to keep up with how the evolution of the technology goes, we need the safety management systems and the other I don't know what you'd say, infrastructure behind the scenes to make that happen. You're working at the Flight Safety Foundation. I want to shift gears a little bit. Our listeners may not be very familiar with that organization. Could you share a little bit more about what it is and the efforts that you work within the Flight Safety Foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Flight Safety Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to aviation safety. It's dedicated to be impartial, independent, and focused on elevating aviation safety across the globe and international. It's been around for 80 years, focused on this mission. One of the original Wright brothers was one of the founders of the organization. So it's something that certainly predates me, and I am honored to be a part of the Flight Safety Foundation. In fact, the first article I ever published was about the implementation or the application of SMS in drones with Aero Safety World, which is Flight Safety Foundation's publication. So for me personally, it sort of comes full circle. Flight Safety Foundation is run by our board of leaders from the aviation community. Michael Whitaker, who is now the FAA administrator, was previously on our board as a representative for Supernal, which is an advanced air mobility group. So, it's really focused on industry leaders who care about safety deeply and trying to do all we can to highlight the challenges in the space, whether that's in traditional aviation, we're talking about economics or markets that are affecting safety. We talk about the Aviation Safety Network, which is a way for us to collect data that then we can give back to our membership to highlight safety concerns. There's a portion of Flight Safety Foundation which does auditing as well. It's sort of a separate element within Flight Safety Foundation, leveraging what's called BARS, which is the Basic Aviation Risk Standard. Right now, I'm leading our advisory committee for autonomous and remotely piloted aircraft capabilities, which brings together industry leaders from academia and civil society and private industry and government. One of our goals is to look at how our BARS program can be aligned with international best practices. So things coming out of Europe, out of Asia, that are perhaps evaluating safety in a different way, especially for drones and advanced air mobility. So that's where we're really focused. I think when it comes to Flight Safety Foundation, the one thing people really appreciate about the organization is that impartiality, where it really is the only organization in the world, or only nonprofit in the world, focused on aviation safety and serving our members in that way.
And so what does a typical day look like for you in your specific role? And, through that, what are some of the key challenges that you're looking to solve? Oh,
man. It just depends on what's going on, right? So like so many jobs out there right now, post-COVID, I think things have changed quite a lot. My work is sort of hybrid. I'm in DC, 3 or 4 days a week at the headquarters. For the rest of the time, I'm either in the field talking to our partners and members, or at working directly with, at going to conferences and talking about these important issues, learning from others in operations, attending things like the drone safety team, or working directly with our partners at ICAO or IFALPA or ALPA or CONSO. A lot of acronyms. I realize I don't have time to just spell all those out, but my focus on a day-to-day is thinking about which members are doing the most impactful work and how to get them to share their story and their lessons learned, and then supporting them to do that. I would say over the last month, for example, we worked through our RPAC, or the Autonomous Remotely Piloted Advisory Committee, Aircraft Capability Advisory Committee, to draft an ICAO information paper on the topic of right-sizing safety management systems for drones and the advanced air mobility sector. And that was accepted by ICAO and published for the Air Navigation Council conference that's in September, which we're really excited about. Flight Safety Foundation is in a unique position with ICAO because we're a recognized non-CAA member, which means we can, bring papers to them and provide aviation specific knowledge. Other days I'm researching and reading as much as I can, working with NASA on in-time aviation or future digitally enabled cooperative operations, or even through their Sky for All program, which is looking at how, by 2050, what will aviation look like? What infrastructure needs will there be? And so, maybe we're at Langley, maybe we're at Armstrong, or Ames, and having these conversations to really create tangible documents to help people design a better future for aviation, one that is is focused on safety and people.
Wow, very, very cool. And so, I imagine that being, internationally focused and very safety driven, you have to have employees in the flight safety organization that come from different backgrounds, like pilots and research scientists and whatnot, right? So could you just walk us through some of those key roles for the younger folks out there who are listening to this, who may want to work at the Flight Safety Foundation in the future, right? What are some of the pathways they need to take? Do they, do you primarily hire more from the research industry, or is it more from, certain roles in the actual industry? Walk us through that and some of the open roles that you may be hiring for over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's a great question. Flight Safety Foundation is a somewhat small nonprofit, right? We have a tight team, but we have interns. We do hire folks for certain projects, and so I think that what I've seen is the people who do the best are the people who care the most about the topic that they are like looking to perform on, right? So one of my colleagues, Caleb Gould, he's an amazing researcher, right? Deeply passionate about it, but he's also a pilot, right? So he's also trained on A320s, A321s. He is an Olympic level swimmer. And so he's somebody who's like able to dedicate himself and really cares about doing a good job exploring aviation analytics and data, right? I would say that, and that's a unique space, right? Is being a researcher. And he doesn't just focus on one project, right? Like works on all the projects, whether that's rapidly becoming an expert in aviation AI, or becoming an expert in data analytics, tracking, a variety of things internationally around aviation fleets. And so it's really about where you're able to apply yourself and giving yourself the ability to think critically, I would say. So for me, like my background, I'm not an engineer, I'm a policy person, right? I do care deeply about aviation safety, but really the thing I care most about is talking with folks about what they care about and seeing how we can support them and help them. I think that's something that's probably universal across jobs, is like, if you really want to help others, then just being able to listen to them and try to take sort of your own ambitions out of it and just cater to what they need out of, safety support or research, or, what does success look like for them? And then how can you be a part of that? So for a student, like studying now and trying to get to a place like a Flight Safety Foundation, my biggest advice would be just go and do cool stuff that you care about, right? Like that's the thing that I did in graduate school. Was I went to Bangladesh and I went to India doing microfinance. And then that led me to being hired at University of Southern California Aviation Safety and Security, right? I didn't go and study microfinance to get into drones. I just went and did something really interesting and was able to tell that story. And because I cared about it, I think I was able to find my way into something that now I feel very passionate about. Also, being a pilot helps. If you can get a pilot's license and get some aviation, get some time behind the stick, then I would say do that.
Does it matter if you're a pilot of a drone or of an airplane? Put you on the spot.
I would say that, let me just say this. I'm also a musician, right? So I play drums. I was a good drummer, a good percussionist. And I always wish that I'd played an instrument that required me to have a better knowledge of reading music, because that would have made me a better drummer, better at everything else. I would say being a drone pilot is sort of like being the drummer. You know, you have a pretty good knowledge. You can talk some of the lingo. You can get in there and you can fly some missions. But if you want to be a full musician, if you want to be a fully fledged, really appreciate all aspects of it, then you should probably go ahead and learn a different instrument, or get a different instrument rating in this case. You know, yeah, go and do that pilot's license.
I love that analogy. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Absolutely. Cool. So Harrison, thanks for all of this. This has been really helpful. We're going to just transition into the more rapid fire and softer side of things. The first question I had on that side is, can you for your role specifically and throughout your career, could you name one hard skill and one soft skill that you feel is required to succeed?
The hard skill, I would say, public speaking. Does that count as a hard skill, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's not been mentioned as much, right? So
yeah, I would say public speaking, because it matters for everything from like working in groups to like moving towards consensus, toward like negotiations, also presenting. Like, no one is going to care about your thing unless you help them care about it, right? I think that's where a lot of folks fail, is they have great ideas, they have great papers that they've written, just phenomenal research, and they just expect other people to care about it too because they do. But that's not the way the world works. Like, you need to be able to tell your story. You need to be able to like make people come along with you. You need to bring them along. And so I think public speaking is the thing that does that, and persuasive writing. I think writing is another one that, yes, we have ChatGPT, and maybe you'll be able to write everything with AI, but I still find that, being able to put together a cohesive thought into an email even is challenging, and you need to be able to do it. And then a soft skill, I would say be curious. Like, I really like, I don't know if you guys watched, I'm forgetting the name of it now, but the soccer show where the guy is from US and he goes over to be the soccer coach in Britain. It's on the tip of my.
Oh yeah, Ted Lasso. Yeah.
Thank you, Ted Lasso. Where he says, "Be curious." I really that resonated with me so well, because if you're not out there asking questions, you'll never expand your world. And so I think the engineer who is an expert in their thing, and then just ask a question like, I wonder if I applied my specific knowledge set to this new industry, what would that look like? Like, they're going to be the billionaire because they found that niche role. And that was sort of my experience, was applying safety management to drones very early on, was how I got into this world that probably was very nascent. So
yeah, very cool, and well said. Especially with the public speaking, it's often, I would say, in a gray area, right? Because it could be considered a soft skill as well. But what you mentioned with public speaking having elements of sales and essentially product marketing, because you have to explain the value proposition of what you're doing, things like that, right? It just encompasses so much more these days, because everything starts with a pitch or a business case, right? So yeah, it has just layers attached to it, which essentially make it lean more towards the hard skill side. So yeah, well said. What's your fondest aviation memory?
Great question. So many. Fondest one was probably one of my first, which is my dad and I my dad worked for a company called TRW, which was Space and Missile Defense. And he would take me out. I'd visit him on every other weekend, and he'd take me out to build model rockets. And then we'd shoot them off, the Estes rockets, or you put the thing in and you'd shoot them off. And I had this one, like 6 foot one. It was like this giant behemoth. And I'm pretty sure we didn't have the right length launcher thing, like launcher pipe. And it was slightly windy. And we go 3, 2, 1. And it was always my job to like hit the button which launched it. And right when we did, a big gust of wind like knocked it on its side, and it turned into this missile that just started like flying across the big ground. And my dad is, what are we doing? Nobody got hurt. Everything was fine. But I think I'll always remember that. I was probably like 10 years old. That was really like a fun memory. And we probably could have mitigated the risk a bit differently if I look back and I apply some safety management precepts to it. But yeah, so I think that's probably my fondest memory of aviation.
No, very cool. What part of aviation do you feel is least understood by the general public, and what can they do to learn more?
Great question. I feel like I say great question every time just to buy myself time to think about it. That's probably it. What
We like our ego stroke too, so it's all good.
Yeah, is the least understood. Okay, I'll be selfish and talk about drones again, because that's the world that I know, right? There's probably a better answer, but I'll say that like all drones are capturing your data and invading your privacy and selling it to China, right? Like that seems to be a big concern with drones. Drone delivery operators like Zipline or Wing or Amazon Prime Air, like these guys are just collecting your data. And like, having worked for a drone delivery company, like the last thing they want to do is capture you on camera. Like that is not and like using that data, it's not even usable, right? It would violate so many concerns that nobody wants that. But I would say that like really the questions around privacy are really, really important, and it's something that the community is concerned about and misunderstands to some degree. And then also, I think the average person doesn't quite understand the impact, the revolution that's going on in aviation right now around combustion, around the possibilities for safe and sustainable airline fuels, whether that's hydrogen or electric or fuels that are biological airline fuels that reduce emissions. And so it's really exciting. I think it would inspire a lot of people to get into aviation. I think if they saw just the amount of work that's going into creating an electrified sky that can move people and goods to unprecedented places, connecting completely disconnected populations. I was a part of some of these networks in Africa, for example, helping to set up some of these drone delivery networks in Africa, and just the amount of vaccines that you can move to people who've never received vaccines, blood deliveries to folks who bleed out, have a higher rate of bleeding out during childbirth, just like, or even like agricultural product to diversify agriculture, which increases calorie intake for people. Like all of these things have massive positive effects, and it's all because the new forms of aviation are making it possible. And I think that that's something that the average person doesn't really know yet.
Yeah, well said. And the last question in this category is, what's your favorite flight leg experience? And tell us about, the origin, the destination, what airline you were flying, what cabin, etc.
I did receive a bottle of champagne one time. I had the opportunity to fly business class from Rwanda, Kigali, to I think Belgium. And I received a bottle of champagne for my birthday. It was my birthday. And I walked off the flight holding my bottle of champagne. I was really excited. It was like 10 in the morning because of the flight time. And you have to, if for anybody that goes through from Africa, flying through Europe to the US, you have to go through security. And so I had my bottle of champagne, and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. You're going to have to throw that away." So they're like, "You can drink it, right now, I had my boss next to me. I wasn't going to chug a bottle of champagne at 10 a.m., but that was quite a nice, a fun experience flying internationally as well. So, you know, a
Don't
lot of
worry,
fun.
they enjoyed it later, I'm
I'm
sure.
sure. Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty cool though. Harrison, thanks for that. We're going to transition to the next sort of segment. Peter, what is that segment?
Well, Ashwin, you already started it a little bit with your question of what airplane type he was flying, but we're into the trivia round now. So, Harrison, this is your trivia round. This
Uh-oh.
is the opportunity each of our guests have to answer 5 questions from the depths of Peter's brain. And if you don't get them right, it's no problem at all. We're just here to have some fun and educate. So,
Perfect.
are you ready?
I hope so. Yes.
All right. So, when you look up at the sky or out at the airport and you see this emergency exit door, could you
Ooh.
name the airplane type that it's from?
Let's see. It's got a window. 787?
You got it right. That is correct.
Oh, wow. All right.
So, with this broader, you can see the 787 logo, and it's United 787. So, maybe your time in San Francisco and Newark paid off on that one.
787's a delight to fly on.
All right. Switching airlines now. This U.S. airport was home to Delta Airlines' gateway hub to Asia from 1986 to 2001.
Ooh.
Can you name the gateway city?
Oh man, Delta. I'm gonna guess that it was on the West Coast if you're flying to Asia. I'm gonna guess Los Angeles, LAX.
It's a good guess. It was a good line of thinking, West Coast. But you gotta go a little bit more north
Okay.
to Portland.
Portland. Ah, okay. I was
Portland, Oregon was
Seattle,
Delta's Asia hub. Yep.
Okay.
And then you had Northwest in Seattle and
Okay.
United in San Francisco.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
All right. Routes. Can you name 3 of the 4 airlines currently flying the following route from Los Angeles to Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport? There are 4 airlines currently flying the route. Can you name 3 of them?
I'm gonna go Air France.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna go American. No.
Not one.
Okay. United? No, they wouldn't go through LA. Yeah, that's tough. Delta? Let's go Delta.
That is another one.
Okay. Who else flies through de Gaulle? Who always connects through de Gaulle? I don't know.
The guess or the trivia or what do we the hint, I should say. I can't even put my words together. The hint for a third one is a French territory in the Pacific.
Oh. I don't know. Air Paul.
You want to guess, Ashwin?
Not really. I would have guessed La Compagnie, but I don't think they go to the West Coast.
Not the West Coast, not the East Coast.
Yeah,
Air
no.
Tahiti Nui.
Oh,
Air Tahiti.
Oh, French Polynesia. They fly from Los Angeles to Paris as an extension. So,
And Norse, huh?
and then Norse, the low-cost carrier from Scandinavia.
Okay. Cool.
yeah, I'm very surprised too that American doesn't fly direct to CDG.
Nonstop. Nope. You got 2 of the 4. That's good. Good job. All right. IATA codes. So a 3-letter code in this case represents an airport.
Mhm.
Lima, India, November. LIN. Can you name the airport? I'll give a hint. It's in Europe.
Yeah. Okay. It's helpful. Man,
The second hint is it's not the city, it's the name of the airport.
yeah. No idea.
The Milan
Milan.
Linate.
Oh,
So the MIN is obviously from the name of the airport, not the city that it's in. So
That's
unless
good.
Linate is a city, I haven't done my research there well enough. So maybe it is
I'm
a
not going to
city.
fact check you.
All right. All right. Question number 5, last one. Airlines. Can you name the airline that uses this logo?
I can't. I'm going to say Swiss Air.
That's a good guess.
Looks like Swiss.
But you know what's interesting about this one is the coloring is completely not connected to the name, even though the name of the airline has a color in it.
No idea.
Air Greenland has a
Oh.
red logo. Go figure. So
Nice. Everything's confusing about Greenland because it's the icy one, not the green one. You got the red.
exactly. The airline has a red color scheme. So there you go. Well, very well done,
I got
Harrison.
one.
You
I
got
got
one and a half. Half a point. So
Perfect.
well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
that was fun. Lots to learn there. Thanks, Peter. Harrison, this was such a fun time just chatting with you about drones and safety and stuff. And really good luck with all the important works that's going on, and really looking forward to seeing more progress on the safety side, because we need to reduce those anxiety levels as much as possible. But really, it's such an important space where there's so much innovation, that if we could make things work in a safe, secure, reliable way, there's just so much potential to progress with economic benefit and transportation needs and package deliveries and things like that, right? So yeah, really was exciting to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was great to chat with you. I'm really excited to highlight this conversation externally and pass it around. I think what you guys are doing is really important to making aviation accessible, especially in education and looking at different aspects of aviation. We need more people who care about this stuff engaged. So thank you.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for joining us this week. Send us any feedback, trivia ideas, or future topics you may have to our email at aeropedia.podcast@gmail.com. See you on the next leg of our journey.
Bye for now.
Remember any heavy, contact departure 119.2, good night.
49.3, speed at 290 heavy. Thanks.